Let's talk about what's probably the best chance we'll ever get to save the planet and ourselves.
This pandemic has given us a kind of glimpse on just how nature can mess with us if we mess with nature.
And we know it's a mess, but for a while there, nobody was driving or flying. Factories shut down. Our carbon footprint shrank a few sizes, but now the global economy is chugging back to life. And all those people pushing for a sustainable future, well, they're warning we can't go back to business as usual.
This pandemic is a wake-up call.
So how did the pandemic affect the environment? And is it possible to bring back the economy without killing the planet? With COVID-19, the Earth basically caught a break, and maybe we have too. For starters, the global shutdown did a lot of environmental good. People noticed.
Suddenly, the air we breathe is cleaner than it has been for decades. Air pollution has been radically cut, emissions have plummeted, and suddenly everybody's talking about nature.
It happened fast. Almost overnight, cities like Beijing and New Delhi, which usually choke on smog, were able to enjoy baby blue skies. Bees could smell flowers and find food more easily because of less car fumes. Deserted streets also meant some wild animals made a bit of a comeback.
Look.
Though the return of swans and dolphins to Venice, well, that was fake. But still.
We have really an opportunity now, and it would be a shame to miss it and to just go back to this very polluted, high climate risk world that we had before.
Over the last decade, CO2 emissions have been rising around 1% every year from things like cars, planes, and factories. But all of that activity ground to a halt during the pandemic. And experts think that by early April, global CO2 emissions had decreased by around 17%.
That decrease comes largely from road transport. The lockdown is a brutal way to do it, but you can see the size of the effect.
But it's not all been rosy. Billions of us have been told to wear gloves and masks and wear more protective gear. And it's all piling up on the mountains of garbage we're already dealing with. Animals that were protected because of tourism and the money that came with it suddenly became targets for poachers. And the world lost more rainforests. In March, it was more than twice the monthly average.
While this pandemic has been going on, we've had no end of big corporations making the most of it and taking out huge chunks of forest, not least in Amazonia and Indonesia and so forth. The fundamental reason for this pandemic actually happening was because of a zoonotic disease. It spread from animals to humans. The more you do that, the more opportunity there is for diseases like COVID-19 to break out and bring the human world, to a standstill.
That standstill is now starting to look more like a slow shuffle. Lockdowns are lifting, economies are powering back up again, and emissions are returning to pre-pandemic levels. Which is worrying because even before this crisis, we had ambitious climate goals, and we're behind. Right now, the rise in global temperature is around 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and we're already feeling it. There have been more wildfires, longer droughts, the storms are crazy, ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, but we're on track to hit a 1.5 degree rise by 2030 and soar past that if emissions keep going up. Now, even 0.5 degree may not sound like much, but it's a world of difference. At a 1.5 degree rise, the Arctic Ocean would be ice-free at least once every 100 years. At 2 degrees, that's once every 10. At 1.5 degrees, sea levels would be 10 centimeters lower by the end of the century than they'd be with a 2 degree hike. Coral reefs, well, they're in bad shape regardless. To stop that happening, we need to get carbon levels down. A growing number of countries and companies are signing up to the goal of zero carbon by 2050. That means cutting emissions, but also finding ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere until the net gain is zero, and to do it in 30 years.
We put out lovely, nice, sustainable development goals at the international level, but in normal life, sustainability is a really difficult ask.
But these aren't normal times, which is why this is seen as an opportunity. What if we don't fully go back to our old ways? What if, as people in the climate change business are saying, we rethink how we recover from this economic meltdown? Cities like Milan, Athens, and London already have plans to reallocate street space from cars to cycling and walking.
President Macron in France is promising billions of dollars to the French car industry if they focus on producing clean, green, electric vehicles. And the government plan to rescue Air France, that is contingent on the carrier scrapping some domestic flights, so encouraging the use of people traveling by train. Of course, for every Macron, you have a Bolsonaro or a Trump.
As in politicians resistant to green policies, which for climate scientists is a problem. Because what they all say over and over is that to stop climate change, we have to think big.
Now, what we haven't seen yet is really demonstration that governments have understood the scale of the action. I mean, it's not about building a few cycle paths here and there.
One of the most fundamental things that needs to be changed is how we measure the economy, because I think that sort of sits at the root of the problem.
Azhar is talking about gross domestic product, which is the total value of the goods and services produced by a country, usually measured over a year. The more GDP grows, the healthier that economy is seen to be. And that model has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But the cost to the planet isn't factored into GDP. Things like pollution, climate change, and the planet's resources. It's why economists say that model isn't sustainable.
So GDP has been a great tool for the last 70 odd years, but in many ways it's reaching the end of its usefulness.
We have an economic system that kind of drives us into consuming more and producing more, and that, in many ways, is what many governments want us to get back to.
But a lot of people say we don't have to go there. Climate activists and economists are pointing to trillions of dollars on the table right now that governments have earmarked to revive economies. It's a huge amount of emergency cash.
Governments really have the opportunities now to take a hard look at their stimulus package and to make sure that this is as green as possible.
If those trillions of dollars are invested in restoring the fossil fuel economy, it will lock in, basically, the worst effects of climate change. But if those trillions are instead invested in a move to a zero carbon economy, they could open up enormous investment opportunities and bring back millions into gainful employment and preserve a livable planet into the bargain.
The point they're making is some of that money being used to recover from the pandemic could be used to avoid an even bigger catastrophe.
If we think this is bad, we ain't seen nothing yet. Because if the climate crisis really kicks in, huge swathes of coastline will be uninhabitable. Hundreds of millions of people will be affected. There could be climate refugees in New York State. There could be climate refugees in the home counties of England. Job losses, disease, social disorder, you name it, it's COVID times 10.
Obviously, nobody wants that to happen. And right now, there's money and opportunity to make sure it doesn't, on a scale none of us have ever seen. So you kind of have to wonder whether this is our last best chance to get it right. There's plenty going on in the world, so if there's a story in the news that's complicated and you want us to explain it, let us know. Get in touch with us on Twitter or Facebook. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss our next episode. I'll see you next week.